For 170 years, the foundation of professional economics rested on the principle of comparative advantage. It was the belief that international trade benefits a country regardless of whether that trade is considered fair or not. This classical model relied on a set of rigid assumptions. It required perfect competition, where countless small firms fight for market share, and constant returns to scale, where the cost of production remains the same regardless of how much you build. In 1987, MIT economist Paul Krugman challenged this consensus. He published a paper titled Is Free Trade Passé? Introducing New Trade Theory. Krugman's math showed that 19th century models fail to capture how modern industrial giants actually compete. By proving these older theories were incomplete, he ended the era where free trade was the only supported policy in economic theory. New trade theory centers on two concepts: increasing returns, also known as economies of scale, and imperfect competition, or oligopolies. Developing advanced technologies requires massive fixed costs. Because the cost per unit drops as production increases, markets will naturally consolidate into a few massive firms. This creates an environment where a handful of global players dominate. Classical theory dealt with goods, like wheat and textiles, where scale was less significant. Modern trade is dominated by passenger aircraft and semiconductors, where scale determines who wins. In this world of giant firms, a mathematical loophole appears. If a market can only support a few players, a government can intervene to ensure its domestic firm is the one that survives, capturing wealth that would have gone to a foreign competitor. Under these new rules, subsidies and trade restrictions shift from being mere political tools to being mathematically viable strategies for increasing national income. To demonstrate this, Krugman used a model of the market for a 150-seat passenger aircraft. He assumed a global market contested by only two potential competitors, Boeing in America and Airbus in Europe. The development costs for this plane are so high that the market can only support one profitable firm. If both companies try to enter, the resulting competition will cause them both to suffer losses. This payoff matrix illustrates their choices. Boeing's decisions to produce or stay out are on the vertical axis in blue. Airbus's choices are on the horizontal axis in red. If neither firm produces, profits are zero. If both firms enter the market, they fail to cover their fixed costs, and each takes a loss of 5. If Boeing commits to producing first, Airbus realizes that entering the market guarantees a loss. They stay out and Boeing captures 100 in excess returns as a monopoly. This creates a Nash equilibrium, where one nation reaps the monopoly rents while the other is locked out of the market entirely. To change this outcome, the European government must figure out how to capture those returns for its own firm. They use a strategic trade policy. The government guarantees a subsidy of 10 to Airbus if they choose to produce. You can see the numbers in the Airbus column adjusting to reflect this guaranteed payment. This subsidy changes the math. Even if Boeing stays in the market, Airbus no longer loses 5. The government payment ensures they make a profit of 5. Boeing now knows Airbus is guaranteed to produce. Since entering a contested market would mean taking a loss of 5, Boeing chooses to back out. For a cost of only 10 points, Europe secures the entire market for Airbus. This yields a profit of 110, successfully stealing 100 points of wealth from the American economy. The model proves that a government can raise national income strictly at another country's expense by tilting the terms of competition. If the math for capturing wealth is this clear, why do economists still reject this strategy as a practical policy? The first issue is empirical. Real governments lack the precise data needed to fill in these matrices. They are making decisions in a fog, with no way to know the actual values of the returns they are chasing. Small miscalculations about how an oligopoly behaves, like whether firms compete on the volume of production or the final price, can make a subsidy actively destructive to the nation providing it. The second issue is market entry. When a government subsidizes a sector to capture high profits, those returns attract new global competitors. As new firms enter, the monopoly profits vanish. The financial benefits of the subsidy are eventually passed on to global consumers through lower prices, rather than staying within the home country. Finally, governments face general equilibrium constraints. A nation cannot subsidize every sector. Expanding the aerospace industry draws finite resources, like engineering talent and capital, away from other parts of the economy. The math of strategic trade works in a vacuum, but it tends to fail when subjected to real-world budgets and unpredictable market entry. Beyond the economic difficulties, these policies create severe geopolitical and domestic risks. Strategic trade is a beggar-thy-neighbor policy. If Europe subsidizes its firms, America is likely to retaliate with its own subsidies or tariffs, dragging both sides into a trade war. This creates a prisoner's dilemma. The cycle of retaliation often leaves both countries economically worse off than if neither had intervened in the first place. There's also the problem of domestic capture. Microeconomic interventions are highly vulnerable to lobbying from special interest groups. These groups can manipulate government data to secure subsidies for themselves. This transforms a theoretical search for national efficiency into an inefficient redistribution of wealth to a few well-connected firms. Even if the trade matrix could be calculated perfectly, the political process required to execute it is easily corrupted. Krugman concluded that free trade could no longer be defended as a perfect theoretical outcome. It had lost its status as the single, mathematically proven policy for every market. In a modern economy dominated by giant oligopolies, theory can no longer guarantee that free markets will lead to the most efficient results. But when governments account for missing data, new competitors, and the high probability of retaliation, the potential gains from intervention tend to vanish. Because of these practical limits, Krugman argued that free trade remains necessary as a rule of thumb. A blanket policy of free trade is simple and enforceable. It serves as a focal point that prevents trade wars and gives governments a principle to use when resisting special interest lobbyists. The case for free trade today is built on these political and economic realities. It is maintained not as an absolute truth of the market, but as a defense against the complications of political intervention.